Welcome, everyone. If you've been with us before for our monthly webinars, my name is Amy Friesen. I'm the founder and CEO of Tea and Toast, and we help folks who are either looking to plan on their elder care journey of staying in their home as long as they can and making sure it's safe, and then also learning what next steps could look like, and that could include retirement living or long-term care. We consult on all of it, and we also help folks who are specifically looking to make a move to a retirement home. We're able to compare all the options and really help you through that process. Today, we have Sandra and Adrian from IG Wealth Management. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to put it over to them and let them introduce themselves. And one note before I leave, if you have any questions during our webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat during our webinar so that you don't forget them, or you can put them in at the end and we'll address the questions at the end. Thanks very much. Over to you guys.
Thanks very much for having us, Amy. Great to be here. I wanted to introduce myself and Sandra briefly. I do have a picture chart later on that I'll introduce ourselves more formally, but very briefly, we're certified financial planners with IG Wealth Management, and we're working in partnership with Amy here to talk about some of the things that she just alluded to, particularly financial security as we age, which is the title of our presentation today. So I'm going to start going ahead with the high-level agenda, and some of the things we're going to be touching on today are, from the financial perspective, there are a few key questions that you should be asking in planning for senior living. Obviously, what does cash flow look like as time goes on, now and in the future as things change in your life? What can you afford for next stage living? What are the various options? What are the costs of each? Obviously, Amy comes in there to help you navigate systems in that regard to a big extent. How long will your money last? It's important to understand if you're going to outlive your money or your money's going to outlive you, in simple terms. And then lastly, we always like to keep an eye on long-term estate planning. Certainly the priority should be to make sure that you and your loved ones are comfortable as you age. But what about estate planning? What about passing wealth to the next generation? That's an important consideration as we age as well. As mentioned, I wanted to introduce our team. You can see myself and Sandra on the left side of this chart. We are with IG Wealth Management. You'll see Investors Group Financial Services Incorporated as our official dealer name. In our extended team, we also have Rick Young, who is another certified financial planner on our team, and Rachel Brown, who is our executive assistant, and she is, we call her our Chief Operations Officer, keeping us all in line. So that's the team, and Sandra and I will be speaking in various parts of this presentation for you to you today. So what about a plan? What's important in creating a plan that works? If I were to boil down this chart into a few simple sentences, it's assessing where you're at now, where you need to go, and seeing what the long-term plan is from an overall estate planning perspective. So in a little more detail, determining your goals really comes down to taking a snapshot of where you're at today. Also, as Amy alluded to, you certainly want to look ahead for yourself or your loved ones in terms of what are the options for senior living, what level of care will be required down the road, and what each of those options cost. And that will dictate a spending need in current and later years. The middle part of this chart is all about understanding sources of income you may have, whether it be public pensions, private pensions, pools of money that you have, properties you may be able to sell, and so on. We'll get into a bit more detail in that regard later. And then lastly, on the right, as I've already mentioned, figuring out the right strategy for your situation, not only to care for yourself while you're living, but to perhaps, if at all possible, maximize your estate and give more to your loved ones down the road. Some other factors that come into creating a senior living plan are listed in this chart. Some are obvious, maybe some less so. Again, I've already alluded to the fact that you have to take a snapshot of what your current savings and investments are, and to what extent you're augmenting those or not as you go on. What's the need for income? Again, based on what your current and future situation is. what your health is, life expectancy, of course. If you're going to live till 105, that's a longer retirement window that we need to fund from various sources of income versus age 90 or 95, which is roughly our default number that we'd like to plan to in this current environment. Sources of income, what are other taxable incomes you may have? Obviously, I mentioned the public pensions, Canada Pension and the Quebec Pension Plan, not only for yourself or your parent, or what about the common law partner and opportunities for income splitting and the like. And lastly, on the bottom right, I've also alluded to the fact that you may be in a situation to provide for long-term care or other lifestyle options that you may need to look at selling a property or your principal residence to help fund costs down the road. And my screen is not advancing all of a sudden. Stand by. There we go. More about determining your goals and needs on the subsequent charts. Again, as I alluded, basic question, how much money do I need? And will I, or if you're caring for your parents, will they be okay in terms of not running out of money before they pass? And that leads to, well, how much money do you need? There used to be a number in the popular press a number of years ago that you needed about 70% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your current standard of living in retirement. But I guess I'm here to tell you, but that really depends. It could be higher, especially with inflation over the last few years being higher. But what about, again, the central topic of just today's discussion with Amy and her team is, what about if lifestyle and healthcare costs go up in the future? We have to take into account that that could cause a significant bump in your retirement spending needs, could be 100% or more. Bottom line is that we can't give you a general answer. Each plan, each circumstance is unique, regardless of whether you're an individual or a family or a couple. So we have to dig into those details to get what your number is. There are a number of things to consider when we figure out what your number is: 70, 80, 100% of your pre-retirement income. I won't go through the list of questions on this chart, but it's all about what sort of lifestyle will you be living? Where will you be living? Who will you be living with? Those sorts of things. What expensive hobbies? And then, of course, the obvious things about health and will you be able to live on your own down the road? Those sorts of things. So those are a number of things that you have to think about as you envision what your future state is. Again, talking with Amy, this is a key part of her business, understanding the various aspects of senior living and what level of care that you may require. Will you have to downsize or move to a smaller home so you're not navigating stairs, as a simple example? Will you be living on your own or with a spouse? And of course, as we've talked, health deterioration. Will you require what I'll call a regular nursing home, or perhaps more intense long-term care or memory care down the road? All of these things will impact your need in retirement for retirement income. Other sources, income sources to plan efficiently. I have alluded to this already, but at a high level, there are what I call guaranteed income sources as it relates to the Canada and Quebec pension plans. Old age security, guaranteed income supplement as well. And perhaps you have a defined benefit pension from working as a teacher or in the federal government, those sorts of things. And also I have annuities listed here. You can buy an insurance product called annuity, where you buy a stream of money from an insurance company. Those streams are all guaranteed and in many cases indexed into the future. And those are all sources of future retirement income. On the right side of this chart, we have to look at what I'll call asset-based incomes as well. Putting it differently, a pile of money or a property that you may have to draw on down the road, whether that be a vacation property, your principal residence, your RSPs that turn into RIFs later in life, tax-free savings accounts, and any non-registered or defined contribution pension plans you may have to bring to bear. So all of these are important to understand what your total income picture is. And as it relates to drawing from those various sources of income, we also look at income splitting opportunities where possible in the case of a spouse, a couple. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, and she's going to talk about some of the expenses and risks we need to worry about on the other side of the equation.
So when we're looking at the expenses, depending on where you or your family members are in their journey, we would look at it somewhat by decade when planning. So in our 50s and 60s, we're more of in a pre-planning and opportunity phase where we can look to the future, but we can look at opportunities for insurance, for long-term health care insurance, for critical illness insurance. We can look at savings opportunities because we're still earning some income. And we can address some of the estate and wealth transfer planning from a perspective where it's not so imminent, where it's not staring you right in the face. There's lots of time for it. So we look at it from that point. And then later in your 60s, we'll look at options to maybe delay CPP and OAS. And we would look at opportunities of whether healthcare plans needed to be replaced. As we move into the 70s, it's really addressing the spending and expense patterns that are about to change. So this comes down to looking at the lifestyle you are having and the lifestyle you want, exploring, do you want to stay in your home? Are you open to the possibility of moving? Do you have family members you can move with? And then we look at the cost involved of each. Before we're at the point where we have to make that decision, we like to plan for it so we can build it into your plan and allocate the resources before we're in that time of crisis. And then we have time to adjust and look for different ways of funding it. We really want to pay attention to maximizing how long we can get that income to last and cover those expenses. And then from a wealth and estate planning perspective, we really get on top of having those legal documents in place, making sure that there's beneficiaries and, are we talking joint accounts? Are we not doing joint accounts? Do we have wills and powers of attorney? As we move into our 80s and 90s, we look at expenses, again, from the cost of aging in place versus moving. Can you afford to bring someone in and help with home maintenance or even health maintenance and health care? Do you have family to assist you, or do we have to allocate resources to pay for those expenses? And how are we going to address it? We all tend to be in a fixed income state at this point. So it's really diving deep and figuring out where we're going to find more income to cover those expenses. Again, tax opportunities are really addressed in this area too. As medical expenses increase, there could be opportunity to use those expenses on your income tax returns. Also really important through 70s, 80s, 90s, and even in the 60s and the 50s is bringing your family members and professionals into the loop so that you have the support long-term so that they know what's happening. So you know what's happening, so they know what's happening, and everyone is a part of the process. And then as we sort of head into those late 90s and hundreds, if we're so lucky to get there, it's really buckling down and seeing, is the money going to continue to last, or what the next step is going to be. Next slide. Investing in your senior years, of course, comes with some risks. So as we're building through the years, in the early years, we call it like accumulating years. And then we get into the accelerating years where you're saving. And then we get to the point where we're accomplished and we're starting to draw down our income. When we're in the point where we're drawing down our income, there are lots of risks and things to consider, especially when we're trying to cover increased expenses. So if you look at the bottom of the chart, those ones are sort of our top of mind when we're trying to balance health and wealth. So we look at health and longevity, not just from a physical or a personal standpoint, but we're also looking at your financial health and your physical health. do you have healthy assets that are growing and that will support you? Just like your body, is it healthy? Will it live long? Are your assets, do they have longevity? Do you have property? Do you have an investment? Are you fixed with a pension? Then we look at cost of living. I don't know who hasn't been, hit by this change in the last 2 years of increase costs, inflation, and then we also, and not just and then the cost of living, right? Not just the inflation costs, but then as the health increases, we've got those increasing costs there as well. We look at taxes from a tax saving perspective, and also having your estate erode. You built these assets up, and you don't want them to all go to CRA. We want them to go to the next generation. We want them to pass on, and we want them to last. And then another big one that is that can have a huge impact on your financial success in those later years is actually financial fraud. Seniors, we hear about it in the news all the time, that they are being targeted, that they're vulnerable. As we age, we tend to be, kind and open to communicating with people, and as a result can be taken advantage of. So looking at all of these sort of risks or concerns, and in how it's so important that you be aware of them, and to preserve your estate and preserve your assets and ensure that you can make everything last as long as you need and in the lifestyle you want. Next one, Adrian. One of our biggest concerns, and I tend to relate very well to this one, is that there is a link between brain health and financial well-being. So just like creaky knees, as we age, so does the brain, and so does the ability to make decisions. So as time goes on, those decisions don't get easier, and they certainly don't get less complex. Involving a family member or having trusted professionals in your circle to help make those decisions, to help you figure out how to calculate the expenses, how to calculate and figure out what the next move should be, whether it's family, friends, professional, whatever it is. It's really, really important, because those decisions are really hard to make, and having the support structure in place really makes a difference when it comes to that. There's nothing worse than having to make decisions in crisis. So planning appropriately makes all the difference. I say I take this to heart. My mother is in memory care right now, and we certainly encountered sort of the brain health issue years before she moved. It was simple things like double payments of bills, being super willing to welcome anyone seeking to sell their services at her door, whether it be, the kid next door who, instead of being paid $20 to cut the lawn, got paid $200. Windows got cleaned when they didn't need to be cleaned. So it's there. It starts to show being a part of the senior's life, but it goes both ways. Open up yourself to your family and your children, and letting them help make those decisions. The stress as we age of carrying all of those choices certainly has an effect. With my mom, I certainly noticed that when we took over helping with those decisions, you could visibly see her, relax. And then when she did move, her health actually got better because there was so much stress relieved from it. So big advocate of being open and honest with your parents and your children, and bringing them into the circle, and not being ashamed or afraid, or feeling like you're I can't find the word. You're being vulnerable with them, and letting them help you make those decisions is really key. Next one.
All right. So yeah, great insights, Sandra. On a personal level, in my case, my mom had dementia as well before she passed, and you can see it coming early if you're looking for it, but sometimes you only see it in hindsight, where there were clues that cognitive impairment was happening. So keep that in mind as you're dealing with your loved ones. That's all I can say.
And just to add in, my mom had obviously cognitive impairment, but my mother-in-law was on the other side of it, where she passed from terminal cancer. And in those last weeks, months, there was no thought to her financial well-being. She didn't want to make a decision. She didn't care about bills being paid. She didn't care about anything. It was day-to-day survival. So knowing what you want and letting people know long before you're in that situation, and being able to live those days how you want because you have a plan is so key, so important.
Absolutely. Yeah, before the crisis hits, right? So as you've already stated, Sandra, so nice segue into how do we create a living plan for this sort of thing. I'm going to review a few scenarios that we've encountered over the years. I've been in IG 11 years myself, Sandra around 5, and there are a number of situations where we've helped clients build a plan to help handle some of the situations that we're talking about here. So I'm just going to describe a few simple scenarios, and some of these may resonate with you or your loved ones, and I can talk in general terms how we would go about helping them. First one, single woman named Monica. She's divorced. She has her own home, has a RIF, which was, again, is what an RSP becomes at age 71, but no defined benefit pension. She probably has old age security and CPP as well, but no private pension. In this case, Monica has started to show signs of that she shouldn't be really living on her own, and the children are concerned for her safety. 2 daughters she has living nearby, but they have lives of their own, probably busy families, and it's getting to the point where they're not able to help with her increasing care needs. So some of the things we would look at for Monica, or I should say some of the questions that her children are asking, maybe it's a private matter. Maybe they've never discussed finances, but sometimes it's easy to bring a third party in, like a financial planner, to sort through the financial affairs and see, well, how much in the way of funds does Monica have, and are there enough assets to help get additional help into the home that would allow her to stay at her house? Or does she really have to go into a nursing home or assisted living facility, and what are the implications of that? Would they have to sell the home to fund that, or not, as the case may be? And that also impacts the ongoing value of the estate and how much money would have to be spent in that regard. In the end, it's all about giving confidence not only to Monica, but the 2 children, to make sure that their mom is properly cared for. So a very common scenario, but you can imagine as people age, these types of concerns come up. Next one, Clark and Lois. Not Lois and Clark, but Clark and Lois. Couple in their 70s. Clark is retired from the federal government. Very common in this town, defined benefit pension, probably, depending on how many years he had worked in the federal government. They happen to own their home as well. They do have some limited savings, but pretty much rely on Clark's pension for their ongoing income. 2 kids, one's close by, but they've spent some time traveling and have built up some debt. Unfortunately, Clark in this scenario recently fell and broke his hip, no longer as mobile as he once was, and Lois is having to pitch in, but is having a hard time with the care and maintenance of their home. And she's not young either, so the physical needs of looking after Clark in this example can be substantial. So some of the issues that are at play here: do they stay in place? Can they stay in place? Like the previous scenario, can they get some help in to allow them to stay in place? Or what are their options for moving? And what can they afford as it relates to different options? I've touched on this a few times already today. Amy, with her Tea and Toast team, really helps you sort out the various options and what each of those cost. depending on what you need. And you can see what those options, how those options would play out in terms of money outlay. Like I said, will the money last long enough for this scenario, or will they outlive their money? And what if Lois's health declines? She's going to be in a situation where she's helping out with Clark as it stands now, but what if her health starts to go down? Could be a big issue there. What happens if Clark passes away first with his gold-plated defined benefit pension plan? Do they even know what the survivor benefit is? If there is such a thing, it's mostly the case for federal government employees, but for other plans, it may not be the case. How would Lois make out on a potentially lower income? And of course, we always like to keep an eye on, to the extent, will they be able to leave any money to their children if they want to? Again, primary consideration is Clark and Lois here, but you have to consider the long-term picture as well. So lots of issues there. Lastly, John and Mary, two people in their 70s, and in this case, Mary has dementia, and basically John is no longer able to keep up for the care of Mary on his own. They have a home, have some savings, but we don't know much in the way of details. A key factor for this couple is something I didn't mention in the previous two scenarios, but obviously wills and powers of attorney are very important at any age, in my opinion, particularly in the case where there's dementia, because obviously somebody's going to have to step in and manage the affairs, both from a financial property perspective and a personal care perspective for Mary, certainly, and for anybody as they age or get injured and cannot look after their own affairs. So often it comes down to building a robust financial plan that studies the income and expenses, sources of income available, what the options are from a senior care point of view, and building out that plan accordingly, trying to address any gaps as we go. So basically for John and Mary, yeah, what can they afford? Will their savings last long enough? Tax implications of assisted living, they may be substantial. It's very expensive, but there could be substantial tax benefits in terms of the disability tax credit, the medical tax credits, etc. And what happens if John passes away first? In this example, who would look after Mary? Who is the contingent power of attorney, as an example? Lots of things that we build into our comprehensive financial plans to make sure that people are cared for in the long run. So in summary, I bring back this chart that I put up earlier in the presentation. It's about determining where you're at, what your goals are aspirationally, but also what your senior living goals could be if something were to happen from a health point of view. And you therefore determine your spending needs, build out your retirement income sources, look at the various sources and how you can maximize the after-tax benefit of those sources, income splitting, etc. And then ideally, to the extent possible, maximizing your estate down the road. You've got one shot at doing this. Sandra, myself, and Amy deal with these sorts of situations every day, and we feel we're well versed to help bring that expertise to bear. And I hope we've related some of that expertise to you. And yeah, I hope you believe we can help you. So at this point,
Adrian, I just want to jump in and say, if you don't know your numbers, if you don't have the answers, if you don't know how much, you know, your next living situation is going to cost, or you don't know how to figure out what your expenses are,
Yep.
You can find out. You know, you don't need to not know. Professionals figure this out for you, and you know, you can find out, okay, my money runs out in December of 42 because of technology and experience. We can get those numbers to you. So if you have doubts or you're uncertain about anything, reach out, because you shouldn't not know. You should know exactly what you're heading into or what your situation is right now. Like Adrian said, done it many times. Work with someone who can help you through it, because it's not worth not knowing.
well said. Whoops. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Amy to moderate the question and answer session. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay, Amy.
Yep, that's fine. Thanks very much for that. I'll reiterate too, on my end, we have a lot of folks that need to look into retirement living. And a lot of people are scared and think that retirement living is too expensive, but mostly people haven't really gotten their finances under control to actually know what they can afford and what that might look like, and to know what's actually included if they're moving to a residence, for instance, and things like food and housekeeping and things like those things are included. And a lot of people ask me for ballparks, and I would tell you, for in this conversation, since it's a money conversation, I would tell you, as an independent senior in a studio suite in a retirement residence, which is one room, about 300 square feet, you're probably looking minimally at $2,500 a month. So it's really important as you get older to really understand and know your numbers. A lot of what we find as well is that doesn't happen a lot, because a lot of people are scared to pre-plan in this scenario, right? Getting older and nobody wants to pre-plan that. But the people that do are really prepared, and the people that don't, what we find is that their children are often trying to dig through and find out, match up accounts and all that, and it's a kind of a headache for the whole family in general. So I do support the fact that you need to know your numbers, whether you're moving to a residence, whether you're getting care, whatever you're doing, it's really important to know your numbers. So on that point, our chat box is open. I don't have any questions yet, so does anybody have any questions for our speakers today? Oh, pros and cons of reverse mortgages is our first question. Any thoughts?
Pros and cons of reverse mortgages. I will be upfront and say we don't, as part of our product offering, we don't offer them. And but on the other hand, I don't want to paint my answer as being negative on reverse mortgages because we don't sell them. They are an option for people that don't qualify for drawing down on their home equity in other ways. It is an option, but it can be on the expensive side from an interest rate point of view, and it can be fairly restrictive in that you're locked into selling your house when the last of a couple passes. So pros and cons, yeah, it is an option. I don't want to be so harsh as to call it an option of last resort, but there are other options in terms of home equity drawdown that you should look at, perhaps well before you get into a position where you don't qualify for a mortgage or a line of credit anymore, before you pull that trigger, so to speak. Those are my thoughts. Sandra, I don't know if you have any other comments on reverse mortgages or not.
It's a tool in the box, right? So for sure should be explored, but should be explored and compared with other options. So before doing that, I would absolutely be looking at every other option possible and what that will do to your estate and what your priorities are.
Yep.
So figure out, number one, what's the most important thing, and work down from there and address it one by one. And if the reverse mortgage is the only thing that ticks the box, but I would certainly make sure you've explored everything.
We've had people as well that have done reverse mortgages, but a lot of the time, on the line of what you guys are saying, a lot of times it's kind of, they've done it, but they haven't analyzed all of the stuff like you're saying. And I think that you're right, of course, is that just, it's a tool, and make sure that it's the right tool for you, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. Again, I'm not a mortgage specialist either, but I have seen people in that little bit of a sticky situation. So it could work, it could not, but it's most important, I would say, to know your numbers and to understand all of that before going to a solution, which is what a reverse mortgage would be a solution. So
in that, it's knowing all your options, but then all the what ifs that go with it, right? So what if something changes? What if your needs change? What if something else changes? Does that decision still work 5-10 years down the road? Whereas if you're looking at every scenario as time goes on, you'll have that answer ahead of time, right? You'll know, yep, it works, so we can do it. Yep. But it's trying to correct something after the fact isn't as easy as preventing it in the first place.
Well, and it could be very expensive to correct.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, anything in the money world, right? If you have to correct it, it could be very expensive. So
Yeah.
Good to be pre-planning. There's another question. If anybody has any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. What are some tips for seniors on low income?
Low income, and that, have they applied for all of the additional benefits? That would be the start, right? Exploring ahead of time what your plan is long term, whether there are benefits, as in, do you have other sources of income? Living arrangements. There's all kinds of different living arrangements now available, whether it's renting rooms or not group homes, but group homes, senior living. But that's so specific to each person that it's really worth the conversation one-on-one for something like that. But yeah,
but we find a lot of folks that are in the low income bracket, which we work with a lot, because they're trying to find solutions, but a lot of them are not pre-planning. Again, in this pre-planning mode, right? And I think it's especially important if the money's not there to really understand what the options are in retirement living. There's some options, again, depending on that threshold of what you're looking at. And then there's always the long-term care system as well. But again, it's a whole complicated system. So it does come down to individuals very specific on our realm as well.
It doesn't go away just by not dealing with it. It's just still there. So you might as well deal with it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay. I'm 88, living at home and know my income and expenses. I'd rather stay home as long as possible. Not happy with independent living. I'm in good health. Why are senior homes so expensive? And from what I can judge, people at these homes are not taken care of properly. That's a lot. So that's kind of a broad brush stroke as well. I would suggest that I've been in this industry 20 years, and there's some really great homes and there's some medium homes. And so it all comes down to what the care is. That will demonstrate the cost often, how big of a suite, what area it is, all of that stuff comes into the cost model. And part of what we do, I don't know if you've been on one of our webinars before, Lewis, but part of what we do is really narrow it down so that the family and the senior is getting exactly what they want in which home, and really explaining the pluses and minuses of the homes, because everybody has pluses and minuses, but depending on people's situation, they can change. I can tell you there are some lower cost homes, but even at that, sometimes the care is not there. So sometimes that's not an option if you have higher care. So again, it's very personal. I'd be happy to answer questions offline as well if you want, to really kind of dig into that. But generally speaking, people have the thought process of retirement being very expensive, but you have to take into consideration things like maintenance costs of the home and taxes and like property taxes and things like that. All of that stuff, food, all of it adds up. And I would suggest that they're not as far away as people have been led to believe. On tntoast.ca, we have a resource that's a retirement home calculator. And so you can plug your numbers in right there, and it'll give you some idea of that, if that's helpful.
From a financial planning perspective, very common. I want to stay in Adrian will say the same thing. You're not getting me out of my house. I'm staying in my house as long as I possibly can, which is excellent. It's the perfect goal to have. Make sure your resources are there to support that, so that when you can't mop the floors, when you can't cut the grass, when you need help for things, that you already have the plan ready to cover it. And that if something were to happen, like a broken hip, that you're open and willing to move to, or have someone come stay with you, or move to a home short-term, because they do those, sort of like a respite. But having that plan in place, so that, again, people aren't left trying to figure out what you want. So it's not you have to move. It's just, let's make sure that there are alternatives and options in plan C, D, E, so that whatever happens, you already know what you're going to do, right?
I would tell you that we have a lot of folks that tell me that they're going out in a pine box or feet first, or and it's very interesting, because I have talked to a lot of these folks over time, And the very consistent thing is exactly what we're talking about today. The very consistent thing is, no, I'm going in a pine box, but there's no plan. So if you want to stay home, you have to plan to stay home. And so what does that look like, instead of kind of having the more stubborn approach of, no, I'm not going to get sick, nothing's going to happen. You should be assuming, yes, something will happen, whatever that looks like. Make a plan so that you can stay in your home longer, and bring in healthcare services. Or like Sandra said, if you break a hip or something like that, there's respite available in retirement living. You go for a month. Hips are usually about 6 weeks. And have that plan so that you can recuperate properly with proper support, and then go back home with proper support.
One of and it's such a touchy subject, but my mother was single, living on her own. She built the house to die in, bungalow, beautiful, lots of space. But you know what? It's still not suitable for someone with dementia. You can't lock her in. When you start wandering, when you don't remember to eat your meals, when you don't remember to bathe, those are things people don't want to think about, and they don't think that will happen to them. But there are situations where it's just not safe for someone to be in their home, especially if they're alone. So yeah, you do the best you can, but we can't all escape it, So having a plan or an idea, or at least accepting that it could be on the table at some point, is step one. Yeah.
What kind of options are available when you have to draw down your RIF or LIF as you reach 80s and 90s?
Well, unfortunately, there are minimum amounts that you have to pull out of those accounts based on your age or based on the age of your younger spouse. It does come back to examining those and how much money you have in RIFs and LIFs in the first place, to see how that money is being combined with other sources of income, old age security, CPP, defined benefit pensions, etc. Trying to look at income splitting options with a spouse, if there is a spouse in this case, don't know. But just trying to minimize the after tax, the tax on those streams of income, to make the money, in very simple terms, last as long as possible. And we need to develop that financial plan that we keep alluding to try to figure those things out. But to answer the question more directly, yeah, those minimum percentages are there, and you do have to pull those amounts out. It's a matter of how you figure out how to minimize the tax on those amounts. That is key.
Terrific. Any other questions from anyone before we close up today? Give everybody another minute. I think we've addressed everything. No, I think we're good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I will be putting out the recording in the next couple of days, so everybody that's here will get a recorded version of this so that they can reflect and go through it again if they'd like. Forward it around to your friends. And I will also put Adrian's and Sandra's information, contact information in that email as well, so that if you'd like to reach out to them directly and schedule an appointment to talk to them, then that would be great. So if we have no other questions, again, thank you for coming today, and we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.